Let's see, we have sound, yes. Welcome the panelists and welcome everyone to this very interesting panel. My name is Cindy Silveira. I'm Professor of Energy Systems Planning at KTH, and I have the privilege to lead this discussion. I also would like to start by complimenting the community and Dr. Sal for the organization of this event and for inviting me to be here today. Okay, so you have been introduced already to the panelists, so without further ado, we'll move into this discussion. As we know, if you have an orchestra, you have to be people in the orchestra to make good music. You have to have good people that can play their instruments. And I can see in the program that we have been discussing instruments, we have discussed technologies, we have discussed business models, and we have looked at how we are doing test beds. And in this panel in particular, we will look at the framework, the policy framework, and particularly at the European level, and then how this is reflected in what is happening in Sweden. So I will invite the panelists to give a short introduction of a few minutes, so to see where they are coming from in the entry this topic, and then we will open for questions and discussions. So prepare your questions, and people are in the live stream as well, that will be able to participate. So we will focus more on the discussion, okay? So I will start with Ulla Altero, the director of Swedish Climate Policy Council. The Climate Council has not existed that long, so maybe you can explain to the audience also where you come from in that sense. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Smira. Yes, the Swedish Climate Policy Council was set up 1st of January this year. It is part of the, what you call the climate policy framework of Sweden, which also includes a climate law, a set of long-term targets for climate, and also a system of follow-up, and to see that the government and the parliament actually are doing or walk the talk or do the policy that reach those targets that are set up. And that is our task. I'm head of the secretariat, but the task of the council is to evaluate the overall policy of government and how if it really is in connection or compatible with the targets they have set up themselves, so that we actually should reach them in a long term. And if I should try to point out a few aspects maybe of the Swedish situation also in relation to a European context, that is the theme of today. I think I would start there actually, in the parliament, in this policy framework. I think the broad agreements we do have in Sweden now on long-term targets and some principles both for climate policy and energy policy, that is really easy to underestimate the importance of having that broad base. Especially in this time where we live, it seems to be about populism and short-term discussions, conflicts, breaking up, cooperation and so on. I think it was very encouraging when we reached these broad agreements about the same time that we also did that in Paris on a global level, which is kind of an exception to all these other unfortunate trends we can see. And of course it's about giving Vattenfall and all the other actors in the area the long-term investment horizons that we talk about. But since we are facing a historical transition of society, it has an importance that goes much deeper than that. It's about mobilizing the actors in a broad scale, the whole society, innovation and so on. So I think that is maybe, together with the resources we have in the renewable energy and the biomass and so on, an important asset of Sweden. Then if we look up on the emission pattern of Sweden, it's kind of peculiar, or at least different from most other member states in Europe, since we have more or less decarbonized electricity production, but maybe even more more interesting from European perspective, the heating sector, by using a lot of bioenergy, but also heat pumps and combinations of renewable and energy efficiency measures. And that is something which means also that our challenges from a climate perspective is very much focused on what we just listened to, mobility and transport, but also the industry, and where we have a lot of our also heavy primary industry, which is a special challenge for Sweden. So that would be a few things just to point out Sweden in this European context, and the connection of energy and climate. And I think that finally was something very important when I myself was in government around 2009, when also both in the European level and on the national level we were able to connect them into a policy, and not just on Mondays talking about all these nice policy climate targets and then the next day talking about low price energy to industry, but actually how to integrate it into real hardware policy.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I want to go to Andrea here now to get the perspective from the European Union. We know that I can tell that when I started working with energy in Europe and Sweden, I thought that was going to take actually much longer for Europe to move so fast into having a common framework. And of course the energy sector is special because it works in a way that it coordinates action, but it leaves to the members to actually find their own way. But I think that the European Union has been very successful in orchestrating this movement. What do you say?
I think that if we look 10 years back, we can see that the perspective was totally different. So try to look and to see what we achieved in 10 years, and you will see that the progress was quite impressive. We are 2 years before 2020, and let's say the first milestones are there. They are not only targets, but they are also objectives in terms of what we want to change in our society and how we want to live. There is also the commitment which was reinforced, I could say, with the Energy Union 2018 and with the Climate Clean Energy for Europeans at the end of 2016. Now we have the perspective for 2030. Of course, that in all this picture, we have to see how we are going to advance together. We are here in Sweden, but not to be forgotten, the European Union, it's large. And in terms of energy resources, we are quite different. So the challenges are different at the level of the countries. The challenges are also different at the level of the countries, not only in terms of resources, but also because of the, I could say, the development level. So there are challenges in terms of how and how fast, in fact, the new technologies will be adopted in order to transform the energy system. We are speaking, and I watched with great pleasure previously the presentation on the electric vehicles, and we know very well that the Nordic countries are very advanced in this field. But when you look at the Europe of the picture, Europe is more than Nordic countries. So how we are going to advance and to have all these challenges implemented at European Union level, this is a real challenge. So now with the 2030 perspective, of course, that we are still, you are aware, at finalizing the negotiations to fixing the level of ambition in terms of energy efficiency and renewables and greenhouse gas emissions. This is quite clear. But this is also a new approach because we fixed as well, we propose something new in terms of governance, how we are going to work together, how we are going to better integrate our markets. You are aware that in terms of governance for 2030, the Commission put on the table a proposal on regulation for the governance. We are speaking about national energy and climate plans. We are speaking about looking how we can better work together at regional level and at European Union level. We speak a lot about internal energy market, and I think that I don't want to enter in details, but think only the perspective on how much is the target of interconnection today, which is really low. 50%, what will 50% will be able to achieve if we want really to achieve, to get to integrated energy market? So there is a lot to be done in terms of development at European Union level, and I think that probably what is needed if we want, of course, to advance all together, it's probably more solidarity, starting from regional level and building this up to European Union level.
Thank you very much. Boo, you like to always provoke when it comes to the transformation of the energy system. So how do you see the policy frameworks at the moment in favoring these transformations that we are seeing?
Let me start by picking up on what previous said here, because in the past, when we talked about cooperation, it was like that was forced upon us. We didn't like it, but we thought it was good, but we didn't like it at all. I remember very well in Sweden, for instance, when I was involved in building these interconnections that we talk about here. A lot of people in Sweden said, no, we should not have interconnection, we should keep our good electricity in Sweden. That was actually said, and you know that, Ola. Some people were really against, and only lately, I think, what the positive thing is now that we see that probably long term is better if you cooperate. We don't need to force it upon people. It's actually a good, so to say, business case for cooperate, because there will be winners and losers, short term and long term. But long term, we all win if we cooperate better. That is for me a big change that goes, and that's why I think. Regulation today, of course, is pushing us, but acceptance is higher today. And if I would mention one more thing on this, is cooperation, take it one step further, is that there is a trauma in Europe perspective when it comes to building industry. And that trauma is spelled PV panels. Because Europe felt that we were very good by policy, we created a big market for PV panels, and there was no industry developed. And that people believe that it's a God-given, it must be like this, we can never produce in Europe. And that I think, as you know, some of you, that lately we have been involved in the European Battery Alliance, which is a very big campaign to show something different. That we can also build industry together that with this transformation, and we can do it in a cost-efficient way. We can also involve entire Europe and all the resources we have. So I think that for me the positive thing is that it's a bit better, conditions today for even having tough regulations, because we don't need to force people to cooperate in the same way as we used to do.
Okay, and now Oscar, how is the view of the companies? You are in a big company, Vattenfall is working in different countries in Europe, and how is this policy framework, this evolving process within the European Union perceived in the company?
Yeah, obviously we have big operations in the Nordics, in Germany, in Netherlands, in UK, in some other countries as well in Europe. And I think first of all I would like to emphasize what you already touched upon, the importance of the EU as a body. I think it's extremely important, especially in the energy and climate field, especially in these days, as you mentioned also, Ola, that we need a strong Europe to tackle these challenges that we have. For Vattenfall, we have set clear direction now the last years, and that is to become fossil-free within one generation. And for us, that means that we want, one part of that is our own generation, basically, our heat and electricity production. So within like 25, 30, 35 years, something like that, we will phase out fossil fuels. And that is, of course, a big challenge, especially in Europe. But there is big discussions right now in Germany, Netherlands about coal exits. So I think we will see that, and I'm quite optimistic on that. But that's obviously a big challenge for us and many other companies, but we will do it. So that's one part. But another part is also that we want to help our customers to become fossil free. So that means that that is one of the reasons why we are heavily engaged in e-mobility. Like I think you had that session before here. Unfortunately, I couldn't listen to it, but that's one of our areas where we focus quite a lot right now. Another part is helping the industry to become fossil free. And of course, that is something we do together with the industry. We have this project called Hybrid that I also think that we will touch upon today, together with LKAB and SSAB as one example, where we will help to make the industry fossil-free as well. So these ambitions are quite high, I would say, and it's really inspiring to work for that. So what we need, of course, is good policies to help this. And if we look at the policies in EU, if we start there, I think a lot of good things have happened the last years as well. But if we talk, I would like to mention two areas. One is the ETS, the emission trading scheme, where there is an EU ETS reform. That the good thing is that we have been able to take away some of the surplus of the allowances which was needed, but it's not enough. So we need to do more. We need to make sure that we have increasing the linear reduction factor in the trajectory for the allowance caps. So there is a lot more needed on the EU ETS, I would say, to make sure that we have a price on carbon that actually reflects how to reach the Paris Agreement. So that's one part. The other part is e-mobility, and maybe you touched upon that. There's a lot of policy. Obviously, it's a little bit of a new area, but so there's a lot of need for policies in this area as well. And one obvious thing is that we need, in the clean mobility package in EU, we need sort of a CO2 reduction limit. So we need more clean cars, basically. We need more clean cars on the market, and that's actually something that EU could help us with to set a high target on what's actually allowed to put on the market. So there we would like to be a little bit more aggressive. Maybe you're not used to hearing energy companies like us, wanting the EU to have higher targets, but I think that is of course because we see a lot of opportunities in these new areas, also from a business perspective.
So actually, we have already gone past the initial thresholds, and companies are now engaged.
Yeah.
So since we have the title of this session being Energy Union and Climate, and we see that e-mobility and electrification in general is very key for the whole digitalization process and transformation of the transport sector, and that the Energy Union can create different opportunities, but there are also many challenges related to that. We have for 2020, the target of integration is 10%, but will it be reached, really? And then it's 20% for 2030, right?
I think that some countries, as it was mentioned, still have probably challenges in trying to probably better communicate with their neighbors, if I would say. So the level of European Union, you know that it was a level of support which was given through Connecting Europe facility for the electricity and gas infrastructure. So from the part of the Energy Union, from the part of the European Union, I mean, efforts were done in order to encourage these interconnections. I think that what is for the next period of time probably is to complete the package, because this will give us, I mean, the package from November 2016 will have the clear vision on energy efficiency and renewables and what can be done based on this, the level of ambition as well, regulation on governance, and then to start working together on this. I think that if we implement this well, and of course with the next multi-annual financial framework and probably new instruments which are going to be used also in Connecting Europe facility and probably some other new type of projects, of course that will have the perspective to better work together. In the last list of the project of the common interest, not to be forgotten that we had CO2 as well. So I mean, there is a movement which is going not only for electricity and gas. Electricity, it's extremely important because there is a big challenge with renewables. In order to achieve the targets as proposed by the Commission for 2030, we have to have a high level of electricity coming from renewables. So the big challenges are there in terms of course, the flexibility of the system, but not to be forgotten that we still have more than, of course, electricity in our system. And we are speaking a lot about having this system view, and in the perspective of the future is how also the electricity networks will better interact with and synergies to be created with gas, with hydrogen, so with transport to move a little bit only beyond looking at electricity. And this is something probably to be looked for the future better. It's the system approach to have a view more not only from, let's say, a specific challenge, but how the challenge is addressed in the whole system. This probably it will also solve some I cannot see problems, but a little bit challenges we have in front of us with some technologies as batteries, as they were mentioned, and to have a better view of the whole value chain for the technologies, for the solutions that we still want to keep a certain technological advantage in Europe. I'm responsible for energy technology innovation, and of course that all this transformation it's able to be put in place if we are going to develop and to be more innovative. And innovation is, of course, to be able to create technical solutions, but to be able to better integrate some existing technologies. And here, I think that InnoEnergy is doing an excellent work. We work with you, and we know very well that we need to, let's say, to discover more gems in terms of innovation and to try to see how we grow them up. We are living in a world for the energy in which probably we are not putting the same resources as our competitors, mainly US and China, and we need to probably better collaborate, I'm coming again to the same thing, at European Union level. We have a structure for this, but I think that more efforts are to be done, and even in the terms of research, to work together, as I said, to build those value chains that are needed at European Union level. So.
And you talked about technology gems. What gems do we have? Are they more disruptive than we expect?
Yes, I think, I mean, as you're well aware of, that is classic. I mean, if you look at the predictions on the development of wind and solar, that the, so to say, market failed to correctly assume that. Development was always faster. And that historically, that is a little unusual, I would say, that technology develops faster than predicted. But we have some recent example. And today we have similar examples, and if I go back and refer to this discussion we have now on this battery union, that we talk about now that we need to do everything to motivate electric cars and so forth, and that I can say that I'm absolutely confident today that we will see an explosion in the market in a couple of years, where demand will be much higher than what we can produce. And that comes from everything from cars, from batteries, and also to all the raw materials going back in the value chain. And for me, it's quite strange that don't people see this happening. And I have just, since it's a favorite topic, I talk about it. If you, in Sweden today, give you some customer information. In Sweden today, if you lease a car, 60% of the cars in Sweden are leasing cars. It's cheaper to lease an electric car than a fossil car today, if you have a 3-year lease. So it's amazing that, and then of course we have special conditions here that are favorable, but also in Europe as a whole, I would see that within the time frame that a few years beyond 2020, for me it will be very difficult for a car salesman that is honest to sell a fossil car. That's, by the way, an interesting report again, you can read. The one that has studied, if you go into a car dealer today, as a neutral person and say, well, I'm quite interested, can you show me what you have? Almost none of them will recommend an electric car. Almost none of them. So that's one of the bottlenecks. But that's what I'm saying, the conditions are already about to come, and that's why I think we can very quickly run into shortage.
Ulla, how is Sweden doing? We've heard here that we are doing very well, we are innovating. Are we innovating fast enough? And what do you see that is the, let's say, the top issues for Sweden today that the Council for example, is pushing forward to actually address the climate issue.
Yeah, we are talking about ourselves, I think, sometimes as foreigners when we're talking about climate and emissions and goals and these kind of things, and that's all fine. I think when it comes to energy efficiency, the picture is more mixed, I would say. We historically had maybe the lowest electricity prices in the world, which made us to be less efficient with electricity, more with other things. That might not be the same kind of problem anymore, which is, yeah, it's a mixed picture. And innovation, yes, we do have a lot of research, we do have, Smith and others are part of in that sense, but we have not always been that successful, always touching upon that, to move that to innovation for me, something that's spread in society, that makes a change, that changes the markets and build industries. That has been less successful, I think, and we need to speed up. And no one is innovating fast enough right now. Climate change is running faster than our transition process. Even if I can be optimistic like Bo looking forward, but we need to be faster. I think one thing to connect back to where I started, one of those things we do not talk about that much in the Swedish context, but which is important, is about integration. That 10% target of EU for 2020 and the 20% target 2030. I think the figure for Sweden today is 23 something percent.
35.
25, yeah, even more. So, I mean, we have come very far. The Nordic electricity market is a outstanding global example of a cross-border electricity market. We kind of take it for granted. We complain about the imperfections, which are there, of course. But it's something it's so important in being able to integrate these technologies to, yeah, it's some of the solidarity we talk about in Brussels, but it's actually a mutual beneficial, and we did it without a strong commission or without the overstated decision-making power that the EU has, but in a government-to-government bilateral or multilateral cooperation. And I think that is a lesson that we could learn from us in the European context, and sometimes we could tell that story stronger, I think, in the European context. And maybe even avoid some of this, which is also a risk, that you want this integration so much that you tend to you make the administrative burden too high. I think sometimes there could be some pragmatic solutions that we could bring also when we move forward in the European cooperation.
Yes. If we stay on I wanted to ask Oscar before I give you the word book. We've heard here about the perspective from the government side. Then there are still some thresholds. I'd like you bottlenecks. Maybe from the company side, what were some of the bottlenecks that you see that you think we could do more, or the framework could be improved?
Yeah, if I take a Swedish perspective on that question and follow up on Ola, I totally agree on the importance of the energy agreement. I think that was really good for Sweden. That was needed. But there are still, I would say, two areas that we really take for granted that I would like to mention here. And one is hydropower. As you know, we have a lot of hydropower in the north of Sweden. It's part of the energy agreement, but there are a lot of uncertainties, and actually the hydropower is threatened, I would say. Parts of the hydropower is threatened, and we don't have a solution for that at the moment, to be honest. So that is something that will be extremely important in the coming years as well, to make sure that we don't reduce a lot of hydropower in Sweden. The second part that I would like to mention is the grids. And you talked about the integration, integrating the markets, and obviously the grid is the way to do it. And right now we don't have really good investment frameworks for grid investments. So that's something also we are pushing, that we need some kind of on good investment frameworks, because right now to invest in new grids is not really, a good business case, and it's a lot of discussions about it at the moment. So therefore that's something that I think also will be a key topic being discussed in the coming years in Sweden. But that was not really your question, was it?
No, yes, you already gave two good examples, like of bottlenecks or areas that need some extra attention.
Yeah.
The supply from the hydropower and the grid,
Yeah.
the issue of the grid. Was a lot of discussion. Now it's a little bit damped, but it is still there.
Can I mention a third thing? Because I was a little bit inspired by your talk about e-mobility, and I drive an electric car myself, and I mean it's a lot of fun as well to add on your sort of, and also it doesn't cost anything almost. The fuel is almost for free, I would say, but not really, but almost. It's extremely big difference to own a car like that. But one thing that I think when we talk about e-mobility that is also extremely important is what you need if you have a car like that. You need to be able to charge it where you live. So I think to create a frameworks where, for example, where companies build new houses in apartments in the cities, you need to have pre-cabling. You need to have some kind of grid infrastructure tool so people can actually charge where they live. I think that is a bottleneck, really.
Okay, thank you. I think Bo wanted to say something before I open for questions from the audience.
That was about the interconnection, because one thing we haven't touched upon, because a bottleneck and a hindrance of interconnection is that we have different market models. It's very difficult to connect the cable between an energy only and a capacity market. So that's something we have to do also within Europe to harmonize the market models. And there the development is going in the wrong direction today. We are building more interconnections, but we are not harmonizing market models.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, maybe there are questions here, please. We will. Okay.
I think my first question would be to Oscar. You have mentioned that increasing or integrating more renewable energy sources, you see some business opportunity in that. But one thing which also I think we discussed about here was electricity prices. So don't you think that with more and more wind or solar coming into the picture, the electricity prices are going to reduce because their fuel cost is like negligible. So I want to know it from your perspective, how do you see an opportunity in that? Okay, we want to save the world, we want renewable, we want less CO2, but unless there are strong regulation policies who are like forcing you to reduce the CO2 emission, is that the only motivation that you have, or is it really something good from your business point of view that you see with less electricity prices?
It's a really good question, I would say. This is something we think a lot about. It's not a very easy thing to answer, but you are right. I mean, I would say with more renewables coming in, like solar, wind, the price with the market model we have will go down to zero. So it will almost be like for free at the end. So how will we earn money? There, of course, I don't think that we really know the answer to that question. Maybe the market model will change then when we sort of have too much of that. I don't think, probably at that time we need maybe another market model. I don't know. But also from a Vattenfall perspective, we know that this is going to happen. So it's not that we're trying to fight against it because we know it's going to happen. So it's more like, okay, how do we direct our own strategy? So probably we will maybe look into other areas because we can earn money on other things here. We can earn money on helping our customers with energy services, with, there are a lot of different things. So maybe we as a company will change a little bit. And not being the big generator only that maybe we were in the past. But it's a good question, and if any of you have a good answer on that, I'd really like to hear it.
Okay, we have another question. 2 questions in the back. Is the $1 million question.
Yeah.
I have a question maybe for Ula and also Andrea. Is that if you want to have more local production of like critical technology like the battery and what we have with the Battery Alliance, how can we protect that against like cheaper products from Asia? I'm always thinking that we Northvolt is starting out currently, but how can we like support them in being a viable option for the car manufacturers? Do you know if there are some ideas going around of like a carbon taxation on batteries?
I think my answer would be actually to turn the microphone to both, because unlike Donald Trump, I think the answer of that question is more about competitiveness than regulation, basically. Because you are doing right that, Una. How do you do it? Compete with Asia?
No, you're absolutely right. The answer is not protectionist, but I mean, we talk about how you can be fair. First of all, I should starting point is that, as I mentioned, if you have high volume, highly optimized production, labor cost is not crucial. It's more interesting to have a low interest rate. So today it's a good situation in Europe and not least in Sweden. Interest rates are very important. Then it's about to build efficient supply chains, and then it's about a lot of other things. So for sure, I mean, I've seen the calculations, the numbers work out. You can produce competitively here in Europe. However, I would say one of the things that has been discussed in the battery union is that, of course, instead of putting up, I would say, walls and so, but you should put requirements, because today is ridiculous that we have no environmental, say, labeling, no environmental, I would say, requirements at all, for instance, for batteries, and that will have to change.
Like requirements for the amount of CO2 that can be yes, the amount of CO2 which will be.
It's a lot of things. One is the, so to say, the CO2 burden that goes into the production. Another thing is about the responsible mining. So a lot of issues around this, and there we are talking about building a framework where we should have, say, a responsible and clean production of batteries, and that is, to be frank, also that should be a competitive edge for the industry. And at the end of the day, I would expect the consumers also to ask.
Can I add on that? You're totally right. I think that's the requirements are increasing from customers on things like human rights, sustainability criteria, etc. So as an energy company, we are quite used to doing quite, auditing on suppliers when it comes to sort of the old world, the fossil fuels and things like that. But now we see that this is also for the new world, of course. When we buy solar panels from Asia, for example, we really need to go down to the suppliers and see how have they been produced, and is there child labor involved? Is there all those things that I think it's a lot of requirements today, and increasing requirements. So I agree on that.
Yes, and just to add, of course, I simplified a bit. There is a policy aspects as well, and for example, also public procurement, where you can encourage your home market to be a market of innovation and piloting new technologies and a lot of other things. So there is some connection, of course, or combination.
But just to add to this, so we don't get overconfident, it's not by nature that we are clean and nice in Europe. Yeah. Today's situation is that Asia is better than Europe on recycling of batteries. They are better. Yeah. So we have to catch up.
Okay, let's go back to the initial question. I think Andrea had something to say.
I mean, the European framework for the recycle of batteries, the colleagues from environment are working on this. But there is also the question, because if you are buying today an electric car, for sure, I mean, all the producers are using the batteries which are made in China. So now we are trying to develop in Europe something here with Norvolt, but also you have the Asians already building capacity production in Europe. So the idea is that probably for the current generation you have already a certain configuration, and we are trying to do as we can. The idea is to try to develop probably new batteries that they are probably more sustainable, looking at the whole innovation chain. But here you have probably a good collaboration. You need a good collaboration at the level of research in whole Europe. it's something to be looked at and to try to see if we can do something in terms of competitive advantage. Because for the current ones, I mean, we are a little bit behind.
Thank you. There was a question.
Somewhat general question, so it would be interesting to hear anybody's perspective who wants to jump in. How to ensure long-term view in the transition? Because for business and for elected officials, incentives are to produce results fast in terms of a couple of years, and that leads to incentives to go for the low-lying fruits, which may lead to options which kind of locks in partially decarbonized energy system and not completely decarbonized one.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
The initial question, yeah.
How to ensure long-term perspective in the transition in terms of from the business point of view and elected officials on national and European level?
I can start, if you allow me, just with what we are doing at the level of the cities. So the level of the cities, looking from the perspective of the integrated energy system, we are looking at the, let's say, 2050 perspective. So when we are aiming to have in 2050 positive energy districts, you already fix some lines. So of course that all the stakeholders working on projects like this should align and should have this perspective. We know very well that the level of the companies, there is a certain, they want to move fast, but of course moving fast with a certain target of sustainability and decarbonization in the low perspective. So we have, with Horizon 2020, we are supporting smart cities and communities. And the calls for 2018 are to be evaluated this week. And if you read the call, what we are asking is moving from positive energy buildings to the positive energy districts in the perspective of 2050. So in perspective of integration, but also perspective of sustainability in the long term.
Thank you. I see I have a question here, but before I bring you in, is there anybody from the live stream? No?
Can I just answer from the company?
Sure.
On the old question, I would just say that I think the Swedish example with the broad energy agreement is one such thing. So whatever the outcome of the election is this autumn, we expect that we will have the same policies, at least for a few decades. So that's, or one decade, I don't know how long that will have. But at least that's a little bit answering on the long-term perspective, at least from the company perspective.
One thing more, because European, there is actually targets set already for how we reduce emission from cars. That is clearly affecting the development of cars in Europe today. And recently also we got a target for the first time for emissions from heavy vehicles with a 30% reduction. So these kind of targets are clearly long-term.
Yes, we have a question here.
Yes, Marcus Sundqvist from Ericsson spoke earlier here about erosion of the price per kilowatt hours and the need for new business models and so forth. One topic that we haven't addressed that is really sexy and interesting is taxation of the energy industry as a whole. It could both be an incentive and a barrier to change, of course. Today, a lot of taxation is done on the energy sector in general as an important revenue source for many states in the world and in Europe, of course. Some taxation is most likely to be removed in order to, let's say, incentivize the right kind of change that we want. Take storage for one thing. Today, storage is taxated as consumption plus production. So if I would like to store 1 kilowatt hour for 1 hour, for instance, a lot of that storage will get up in tax if I do it on the wrong side of the meter, so to say, or change it over the meter. So that needs to change. I think everyone knows that. But in the end, if you don't sell so many kilowatt hours anymore, or the price is very, very low, and the business model are changing, how will the taxation system of the energy system or energy industry change? Because you can't, let's say, stop the needed change that we want to see to transform. At the same time, if you stay where we are, you will not get any revenues for the states.
Yes, before you answer, I just wanted to add to that because we had this presentation today on the blockchain, on the Julias. Yeah. So keep you.
It's a good point because many of these business models, when you do peer-to-peer, one of the benefits is that you avoid tax.
Exactly.
Right? But, so
Exactly. But we have had a discussion. We have had a discussion on the wind power. In Sweden, on the cooperatives that produced wind power and what about the taxation, etc. And we know that the energy provides very high revenues for the Swedish government. So, how do you discuss? Are you discussing this type of questions in terms of the implications for tax revenues?
Yes, the Climate Policy Council has discussed this briefly, and they are in full agreement that it is a very good question that they will address at some point in the future.
Thank you.
Not this first. It will not be one of our first themes, but I think mobility will be, for example. But yeah, but it is a good one. I think partly it illustrates that we're really in a historic transition of society in many ways, and then we are confused, and the old ways of doing it doesn't work. And I made a report for government on circular economy, which is it's wider than energy, but very similar kind of issues on new business models and taxation. I think partly the digital platforms and what you do is in a way, in principle, it could make it easier to have good taxations and less of free riding and black markets, or if you have made the transition and found ways to put the taxations in the right places and so on. Then energy, I mean, you point out some of the problems. At the same time, and still then for example, Vattenfall is trying to electrify some carbon-heavy industrial processes. Those are not affected by consumer tax on electricity, so the problem is not really there. And maybe it's not a good idea to have very, very cheap, unlimited electric resources to all sorts of things, because that sometimes drives the carbon machinery in a way, or consumption in ways where. Well, I should stop here, but I think the taxation on services, on labor, is maybe in a way a greater problem. It adds to in Sweden, since we have even income distribution on top of that, one of the world's highest taxation on labor, which makes services very expensive and all sorts of material or resource-heavy consumption cheap, which is another part of this problem. Mm-hmm. But yeah. Let's have it for next year's theme of
yes.
the European Sustainability Week.
The discussion continues. I think Boone wanted to say something.
Just a notion that because technology also gives new opportunities. Yeah. Opportunities to avoid tax, of course, but also opportunities. For instance, you could today easily implement a system where you are taxing how much you drive and where you drive. It could so there are many new opportunities, in fact.
Yeah. Yes, I think there was a question there in the back, yeah?
The question is for the EU Commission in particular, and is related to which are the challenges and the problems related to the massive grid integration throughout all the Europe at the moment. Because I want to start from the point that I don't believe, and I wanted to add a comment on the price of electricity, on saying that probably we need grid extension due to the renewable input that we're going to have for many reasons, for the distribution, because the grid is also expected to overcome all the fluctuations and so on. And my concern is about why don't you extend the idea of the grid and merge the possibility that we have at the north of Europe, so starting to create a European Union also on the point of view of the electricity mix, enhancing the possibility on the north and the one on the south to create a more sustainable grid.
Thank you very much. A lot of challenges in the question that you addressed. So, first of all, of course, that the development of renewables, the grid will be really challenged. And think a little bit what will mean that for the grid today if all we are to drive electric cars. So we have to see how we are optimizing this. We have to see how the digitalization is going to help with all this electrification. Of course, that there are collaboration that could be put in place at regional level, and of course that probably a better level of agreement, understanding among some countries is to be considered. And in Nordic, you have a very good example. Sometimes you are complementary and you are supporting each other in the development. But if you take as an example probably challenges that are Spain, Portugal and France, where you have abundant renewable solar, low prices, and France with nuclear low prices, of course that there is a certain, let's say, how would I say, more work to be done in terms of interconnections. So there are different challenges depending on resources, and it's not always easy to move from national level. First of all, not to be forgotten that we have at the current, let's say 2018, we are in countries different different realities. You have the south, you have the central, you have the east, where probably the price of how much they have to pay for heating and for 1 month is probably more than probably one salary. So it's quite difficult probably to arrive suddenly with this. What we propose is just to try to better organize things and to try to move from integration at regional level. These are, in a certain way, I may say, already try to be experimented with the project that we have in place. We are working more and more, and we have through Horizon 2020 projects looking at collaboration, TSO, DSO, consumer, and also to be seen if we can aggregate at the level of the consumer useful demand response and to be transmitted up to the TSO level. There are some experimentation at a low scale, which are already done, but we need to see if we can move this further. There are also technologies, and to see at the level of the energy system how digitalization is going to change this and the grid better to cope with all the flexibility solutions. And then we try to see how also, as I said, I mentioned previously, cooperation at regional level can be better implemented. And what we have as an example in 2018 call of Horizon 2020, we have put in practice, especially for the grid and from the research perspective, a development of pan-European forum, a collaboration of all member states. There is probably currently, as I said, due to the fact that not all countries are equally developed and not all the countries have the same challenges, here probably in the north of Europe we do not speak too much about energy poverty, but we have, as I said, energy poverty in a lot of places in Europe. We have to see how these are better put in practice in order really to be able to advance. And saying advance, with the package from November 2016, we said that consumer is to be put at the center. So the consumer, especially with all the challenges in the energy system, you need to have them to understand what are the changes and to be eager to step in and to really play the active role. So it's quite complex in terms of solution, and probably you have to look at the different pieces of the global picture and to see how you are able to at the end you are able to solve the whole puzzle, because it's really a puzzle.
Yes, and in the same lines, maybe you want to complement, you mentioned the differences, the regional differences within the EU. So shall we expect that this integration and the development will continue having, bringing actually different models? So will that be in contradiction with the whole idea of getting a European integrated model?
I think that we are going to have different business models, of course, and models as well. We try as much as possible, as I said, if something is innovative and good, to try to be replicated, to try to be disseminated at a level that is feasible to be done. And we have the, probably Smart Cities is the best example that shows that having this quite large reality in terms of cities and developments, you may have good models that transform a city, which are different, of course, from Sweden to Bulgaria, but doesn't mean that they are not going in the same direction. So I think it's not, for sure, due to the diversity, it's not that one solution is going to fit to solve all the questions that we have at European Union level.
Thank you. Okay, I have a final question, I think, here. Yes?
Yeah, thanks. One final one. Me representing Ericsson, a global company, do a lot of development, research and innovation for technologies that we try to deploy all over the world. The difference is that we see in Europe, electricity market and energy as a whole is a barrier to us to get scale on investments that we would like to do in this industry. E-mobility was mentioned earlier, where we're trying to get the roaming in and so forth, but there are also other markets. Bo mentioned the energy-only market. If we could assume that for the full of Europe, it would be one other thing. Another thing that is coming now, the initiative is done in Central Europe around primary regulation, frequency containments and stuff like that. Also a very interesting market when it comes to, in our case, low latency communication and setting up things there. We have some thoughts on it. But the markets are very different in different parts of Europe, which limits, let's say, the possible addressable revenue for us to justify investments. So what can you say about that? Because I think that would drive innovation climate in Europe if the circumstances would be better.
In terms of market, normally the Commission, as I mentioned, put the proposal for the directive and the regulation that will probably give it will facilitate the market design and how market is going to function. So it was storage, it was mentioned earlier, storage is addressed, so there are a lot of clarification that probably will come once these are going to be implemented. So it's to be looked at and to see how this is going to be addressed. I understand what you are saying, and innovation, it's of course probably difficult to be put in practice. It's difficult to be replicated, and the structure, as I said, being diverse in terms of the landscape of the energy market, a lot of challenges are in front of us. But as a big company of Ericsson, of course, that probably you have a lot of interest to participate in the development of European market, because if not, you know very well Huawei or some others are strongly interested, and they are, let's say, moving this quite forward. Ericsson will participate on the 28th of June in the General Assembly of Smart Cities, and will be in Sofia. We'll be more than pleased to have Ericsson there, and I think that there is a lot of place for you in the European market and to transform what is done in Europe.
Thank you. So I think we are coming to an end of this panel. Maybe I'd like to give you all a chance to say one final, leave us with one final thought, more in the direction of course we have touched upon a number of issues here. We know in times of disruption and in times of innovation and transformation at the level we are seeing, there are many institutional challenges. And if you were not trying to rank, but at least one issue related to the institutional arrangements that we have, either as being a bottleneck or something that would need extra attention to actually move the agenda, the climate agenda and the energy agenda in Europe forward, what would be that one thing comes to your mind? Not necessarily ranking, but what comes to your mind? Yeah?
Yeah, very short.
Very short, yeah. Mhm.
Wow, that's a big question.
But as I said, let's not try to rank, because we could go on discussing this. But yeah, I mean, the institution, I can start while you think. I think that we have a history of working with sectoral approaches. And as we see, we need to work much more on the interfaces. The innovations are in the interfaces. And we have seen here interface with digitalization, with transport and so forth from energy. And we have many energy. We have an energy agency, we have a regulator, and everything based on institutional arrangements for the energy sector, defined very much as energy sector. That could be something to look into. Gradually, we may have to readdress that. Yeah?
Yeah, this is not a ranking, but just top of mind. One thing that I think is crucial for us as an energy company is working more in partnerships, and that is something we started to do, working with other sectors. Traditionally, maybe we did things ourselves, but we are working more and more in partnerships with other industries, with other companies, and I think that's also a great way of, because we don't have all the answers ourselves. So I think together it's quite it can be really a big impact when we do it together, I would say. So that's the first thing I
think. Very good. Right, yes.
One thing that came out when we had this discussion in the Battery Alliance, we had talked with over 100 companies, is that the industry is ready for tough sustainability criteria.
Yeah, I think they're all important, and to follow up on yours on integration, the silos also within the mobility, going from transport and different infrastructures to actually mobility thinking is important. And then in the end, I think the greatest obstacles is sometimes in our heads, our culture, our ways of thinking on new business models, or and that is sometimes changing. The cultures are the most difficult thing to change.
Andrea, you have the final word.
In fact, as I said, I work on innovation, and we are working in the member states within the strategic energy technology plan. And I'm looking a little bit what is coming up from this. We are thinking too much in terms of we, member states, in things of national priorities. We should probably think more in terms of European priorities. There are projects that we are supporting, and they are involving the national budget, research budget of member states. And they are, let's say, country X, country Y, country Z, up to 28, allocating budget, and everything which is spent has to be spent and come back to the companies in the same country. So it's not too much about currently, probably there are accounting rules at the budget level, but I think probably we should do more in terms to work together and to try to build something together.
Well, that should be I let this be the final word. Very good. So thinking regionally and for Europe, for a strong Europe, rather than for individual silos. So thank you very much. The panel, fantastic discussion. Pleasure to be here with you. And let's leave them hand.